Welcome to the Parent Advocate Podcast, a show where we celebrate, defend, support, and uplift the voices of the LGBTQIA community. I'm your host, Stephen Chikumba. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm joined once again by my amazing co-host, Lizette Trujillo.
Hello, everyone. Lizette here, she, her, aya. The mission of the Parent Advocate Podcast is to elevate conversations and reframe narratives around trans and non-binary youth to help change hearts and minds. Each week, we bring you our take on all things happening from the perspective of two parents of BIPOC transgender kids.
Lizette, we've been doing a lot around helping families, and today we have a guest on our show who can really help us dig in on what that support really looks like.
That's right, Stephen. Today we've got Heather Postelwait on our show, and I cannot wait to talk to her.
Well, as I always say, what are we waiting for? Welcome everyone once again to the Parent Advocate Podcast. Let's get started.
Let's do it.
All right, Lizette, what's been going on? I know you had a crazy week because we had to keep changing our schedules to get this episode recorded. So talk to me, bring me up to speed.
All right, Stephen, it has been a whirlwind. I feel like my life has not slowed down at all. But the last week we got to go to the Familia 10-year anniversary. Mi existir es resistir, which is my existence is resistance in Spanish. And they brought in trans leaders from across Latino America and the United States. It was like a mini reunion mixed with meeting a lot of really new people. What I do want to share, because we are doing some segments called The Work where we're talking about families, is share that like Jose and I are still processing. I mean, when we hear the stats around trans adults, we rarely hear and or really critique or like think critically about the fact that those stats existed because they didn't have a home to go to. They didn't have parents to rely on. And when I tell you that the movies we saw, the interviews we listened to were powerful and hard and all started from my parents rejected me. Stephen, the stories of violence where like women were left for dead and woke up in Red Crosses alive, forced into sex work, private conversations where people shared. One friend shared that they had been kicked out of their home when they were 10 and they brought themselves to the United States at 13 and found work, but then were like trafficked and then ended up in a detention center where they were in solitary confinement for 6 months because no one wanted to be around trans women in these detention centers. And I think what they kept saying was trans women face the most violence by their families, their partners. The violence is not just physical, but emotional. And so Jose and I are still processing it. We're so lucky that our children will never experience this level of violence. And yet there's so much work to do. And our vision, my vision, I felt like in terms of what gender liberation looks like is very narrow when we're thinking about the level of violence that these women experience in our country and in their own, right? And so, and it all starts with their parents, with their families. And so I'm still like processing. That's all I'm going to share because I know it's heavy.
So I don't know what the universe was doing, but I just wrapped up 5 days of Equality in Motion, and our final location was in Montclair, New Jersey. And at Montclair, New Jersey, I had a chance to speak to one of my coworkers who is a trans woman who was sharing with me her journey to achieving her fullness of self through medical intervention and the struggles that she was having navigating the healthcare system, because even though in New Jersey there's non-discrim with respect to insurance, it isn't universal healthcare for gender affirming care. You do not have access to gender affirming care as a matter of right in the state of New Jersey. And the things that she's experienced trying to get facial feminization surgery or augmentation or whatever it was ended up being not successful. And all the things that she related to me about the ways in which she was navigating this space by herself because she didn't have supportive parents, because she didn't have a supportive network, because she was essentially learning on her own. Yeah. I told her straight up, I was like, I'm going to introduce you to my friendly set, because my friendly set has so many more resources and she has a much larger network than I do here in New Jersey, so that you are not a person who is dealing with this as a case of first impression by yourself. There are other people who can at least give you information about ways in which to navigate this system. And even though it's a different state and different parts of the country, there's still knowledge within elders in the space who can absolutely help you. But it was literally heartbreaking to me listening to the things that she was going through, because because the experience that Hobbs went through, even though we had to jump through hoops, I shared with her that I had to turn down a job because that insurance did not cover gender affirming care, would not have covered his top surgery. And so I had to leave a very lucrative job, not accept that offer because it would not have provided the insurance that my son would have needed in order to, again, have surgery. And so a lot of the things that we are dealing with are very narrow and myopic, as you said, and do not really take in the fullness of what it is to be a person of trans experience in this country, whose challenges are multifaceted. Like this concept of the intersectional person and these intersectional experiences are things that we have not fully had to deal with, but is part of what it is to be in this country and in other countries. And I think this fullness is something that we do want to start addressing to make sure that we do all we can to help gender expansive people in this country and abroad.
And it just made me really think about the ways in which trans people, children, are property of their parents. Kids do not have like autonomy and or their own kind of rights that allow them to make decisions for themselves to keep themselves safe. And so there's no recourse for parental abuse, right? And parental neglect and parental rejection. And so it just made me think, had their parents been there for them, much like the woman you spoke to, had they had a place, a foundation to rely on and people to rely on, their lives would be materially different.
Absolutely.
And it's just like, I kept thinking we need to put the onus where the onus is, and that's on the families, that's on parents, that's on caregivers. And that's really where we'll start to see cultural change. Because that was another large conversation we were having. Like Jose told me this last week because I was really frustrated about some stuff. And Jose was like, liberation is a change in consciousness and not everyone is there yet. And so we're using policy as a tool. And so policy, being imperfect as it is, isn't going to get us what we want. But like, how do we begin to create protections and barriers to reduce harm, you know?
Lizette, you're giving me goosebumps. Why? Because this morning I was watching Instagram and I was looking at Chase Strangio's feed, and Chase was saying literally like, I am not voting for Kamala Harris because Kamala Harris is my candidate. I am voting because I know that there needs to be something, some bulwark against all of this anti-trans hatred that is cropping up in this imperfect system that I contribute to. Like that shit fucked me up when Chase is acknowledging he is complicit in upholding a system that works to the detriment of gender expansive people. And yet he's going to continue to work in that system because that is the best that we have right now. And that concept of, liberation being imperfect is really what it is. It's not perfect right now. It is not true liberation right now. Even what we aspire for is not true liberation. If some of us are not free, none of us are free.
All right. We got deep early. So
Lizette, we can go on and on, but we have got to get to this work and we have got to get to our guest.
Let's do it. All right, Stephen. So ABC News reported that a first of its kind survey found that 3.3% of U.S. high school students identified as transgender in 2003, with another 2.2 identifying as questioning. The first nationally representative survey from the U.S. Centers of Disease Control and Prevention also highlights the multiple health disparities faced by transgender students who may experience gender dysphoria, stigma, discrimination, social marginalization, or violence because they do not conform to social expectations of gender. These stressors increase the likelihood transgender youth and those who are questioning may experience mental health challenges, leading to disparities in health and well-being. The agency also estimated that 40% of transgender and questioning students have experienced bullying at school. About a quarter of transgender students and more than a quarter of questioning students skipped school because they felt unsafe compared to the 8% of cisgender male students. Trans students were more likely to experience unstable housing in the last month than cisgender students. The agency also found that 10% of trans students and 10% of questioning students said that they experienced unstable housing compared to 2% of their cisgender males and 1% cisgender females. All this to say that transgender students are still facing stigma and discrimination in their schools and within their peer groups, while also having to navigate anti-trans legislation in their states.
Now, Lisa, this study comes off of the more recent study that was released by the Trevor Project, which talked about the high rates of mental distress that TGNC kids experience because of all this anti-trans legislation. And the two of these studies combined really tells us that adults have to do a much better job in preventing harm to young marginalized youth. It just doesn't make sense that we spend this much time and energy targeting literally the most marginalized group in our society as if it's okay, as if any of this makes sense.
And children should have teenagers, right? We're talking about like high schoolers should have a recourse for when their parents kick them out of their homes, right? 10% is a lot of youth either having to leave their homes because of abuse or being kicked out of their homes because of a rejection around gender identity. That's a huge percentage of students, and they have zero recourse when their parents do this to them.
Well, Lisa, that really goes into the next topic that we have today, which is essentially that Republican candidates have spent more than $65 million, $65 million on anti-trans ads since August. Donald Trump and the Republican Party are really pushing an agenda of division, chaos, and hate, spending tens of millions of dollars on ads attacking transgender people as the right wing really intensifies its campaign against LGBTQ people. The former president's most frequently aired ad targets Kamala Harris over her support for gender-affirming care. These anti-trans ads and campaigns come at a time when attacks on trans and LGBTQ plus people are becoming so much more widespread in the United States. GLAAD, the LGBTQ plus advocacy organization, found that in the 12 months between June 2023 and June 2024, there were 1,109 anti-LGBTQ plus incidents, an increase of 112% on the previous year, all on the heels of anti-trans rhetoric.
And what's interesting, Stephen, or I think unfortunate about like this stat is like, think about what people could do with $65 million, right? Like we could fund a school district. We could work on some infrastructure, things that really, really impact people on the ground. Instead, they're paying this in media ads to try to win an election. I mean, it's so frustrating to see that our elected officials really do misuse the funds that are given to them to harm people as opposed to build up communities.
All right, I'm just going to put this critique in here because I saw a stat the other day that the Harris Walz campaign has raised over $1 billion in this election cycle since she became the Democratic nominee. And I'm sorry, $1 billion for an election. This election, obviously it makes sense, but the fact that we spend this much money on any election when there's so much suffering, there's so much need, there's so much wrong with our country that goes out the window, and we're being asked to spend, donate to elect somebody into office. And we can't do any of that when it comes to supporting the people that need those types of funds when these people actually get into office. So I'm just saying there's a critique here beyond Trump and his hate machine that we all need to do a better job when it comes to how and where we spend our money and what comes out of it. Like if there was an ROI for electing our officials that directly translated into benefits to people in need, then I'd be all for it. But very rarely do we see an ROI on the donations we make to our candidates that actually manifests in good. So just a little critique.
And this is why we need to overturn Citizens United, right? Like, because this is what has allowed massive spending in elections.
All right, enough with these topics. We've got to get to our guest. Heather Postelwait is a middle school teacher in Arizona and the mother of 2 trans children. An avid reader whose hobby has turned into a passion, Heather started a YouTube channel where she reviews middle school and young adult books. You can follow Heather's book suggestions and reviews for middle grade and young adult readers on Instagram and YouTube at Pages with Postelwait. Everyone, please welcome Heather Postelwait to our show.
Welcome to the show, Heather. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So before we jump into the questions, I wanted to share how you and I first met. The first time I ever met you was when I was facilitating a parent meeting. Heather made zero eye contact. Her head was down and she prayed the entire time. And I was like, oh no. Like I remember thinking like, I think I was like 2 years into facilitating. So I was like still like learning and I was like, I'm never going to reach her ever. And I was terrified on how to like support you. And I remember that I was like, hey, let me get you into these very specific religious support spaces so that you can go to a place where you're going to get religious support and then you can come with us and then we can give you that local in-person support. And somehow it blended beautifully. But I think the most important thing to know about Heather is that like 3 weeks after the school board where her children went to school had asked for a training about like how to support trans youth and families. I want to say it was 2016 because Jeff Sessions had just rolled back protections on trans youth on Title IX. And this school board was like, oh, there's no Title IX protection. So therefore, we've never had trans students in this school. And so now we're going to follow these new guidelines, which were not true. And so here we were trying to protect like the privacy of Heather and some other parents in the room. And then Heather bravely stood up and was like, I'm an ally. I'm figuring this out. My kid deserves to go to the bathroom. It was like this really badass moment. But then a friend of hers stood up and said, I can't support you, and walked out like in real time, Stephen, like where like we were watching all of this happen. And we just did an interview on friendships and community loss. And I watched Heather stand in complete love and solidarity with her kids and this friend say, I love you and I won't support you, and walk out. And when I tell you that Heather's one of those people that like, if we needed to take to the streets, she would be there. I would walk next to Heather because for sure she's like about it. So I wanted her to be on this episode of The Work to talk about faith, how that was a barrier and also how that was a point of growth and connection. And I want to just talk about parenting and books and why you love them and why they should matter to us. We have a book club and how that can be helpful to provide language and learning for families as they're on their own gender journey.
Heather, before you go any further, you don't have to do all of that. How about we start by you telling us about who you are and a little bit about your family and maybe how you started this journey.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Heather Postelwait. I am a middle school teacher. I'm a reading teacher, which that's important because it'll come in later. I have two amazing kids and I have been on a gender journey with both of them. The first, my oldest, was somewhere around, I don't know. I was trying to remember, like 12 maybe. I think they were 7th grade. And that's when this whole world opened up that I had zero idea about. When I tell you I lived under a rock, I lived under a rock. And so they kind of opened my eyes. It's so funny how circular the world and the life is. So my baby somewhere early in 7th grade was just like, hey mom, I think I might be gender like fluid. I'm like, I have no idea what that is, but sounds good. Okay. So they're like, I'm going to wear a bracelet and it'll tell you if it's a pink day, if it's a white day, if it's a blue day. I'm like, okay, you do you, boo. Like zero context. I was trying, but like I was just not understanding that at all. And somewhere around spring break, my kid came to me and they're like, no, mom, I'm a boy. And I'm like, okay, that's all right. And I remember 3 things from that conversation. 1, that I said, I love you no matter what. 2, that I said, God loves you no matter what. And 3, that we'll figure this out together, that there's nothing to be afraid of. We'll do this. I got you. And then I know that I probably spent the next week crying and ordering books. I'm like, what books are out there? Tell me what to do. I had no idea. And luckily I had taught a kiddo that came out as trans. And so I knew friend of a friend of a friend of a friend how to get a hold of them. And they put me in touch with Lizette. And so I'm emailing. I think we started with emails, like just to kind of get a feel. And I'm telling her all about like, I need faith. I need God. I need this in this journey. Help me with this. And she's like, okay, here's this like person to go through it was online. So I think you gave me 2 or 3 Facebook like groups and I'm still a part of one of those. And then like invited me to come. And I don't remember praying the whole time, but I do remember crying the whole time. I remember my face down and just crying and somebody put the tissue box beside me and I just cried, but I was there. And I guess if I ever had any regrets, it's just that I wasn't hiding those emotions more. Like I was just like, I wear my heart on my sleeve constantly and probably could have protected my babies a little bit more. Fast forward, we took that journey and there's lots to that, but about a year and a half ago, my youngest came to me and said, look, mom, I think I'm trans as well. And so we've been on that gender journey as well. And I think I skipped a whole bunch of stuff there, but tell me what you want to know.
Well, it's interesting because parenting doesn't come with a manual. Like, I know when my wife and I were with our first, there was the Dr. Sears book. Do you remember Dr. Sears? Dr. Sears published a book on, like, what to expect when you're expecting or something along those lines.
Yes.
And so there were these books that kind of walked you through the process. We had a doula, and the doula kind of explained to us what was happening in the wife's body, what happened with the when the child would get here, and why they want them to do vaccinations and why we shouldn't, and circumcision and why we shouldn't. And so there was a lot of information that we were exposed to about how to just generally bring a child into this life. But there is no manual for gender expansive kids. And for most people, their first experience is their child telling them something that doesn't compute. And so you are at a loss with what to do with that information. And we do our best to guide them and to protect them and to expose ourselves to as much information as possible to help raise happy, healthy, well-adjusted children. But did you have any aha moments when you were supporting your children through their gender journeys?
I had some, like when I was connecting some dots with like both of my kids, they would say something like, well, I've kind of felt like this for a long time, or they would say something and I'm like, oh, I remember when you were little and you kind of did some of these things, especially my oldest or my youngest. So Eve's been on her gender journey about a year and a half now. And I remember kind of figuring this kid's going to be LGBTQ. They are. They're probably going to be gay. It's okay. They loved like Shopkins. I don't know if you remember those things. And they had friends who also liked them. I'm like, I don't care. You can have whatever toy you want. But they've always had this heart and this compassion and this empathy that if we look at the binary, that's not a masculine trait, right? But that has been my child from birth. They have always been empathetic. They have always been this like caring person. So a lot of aha moments where I'm like, okay, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Maybe you do more have a feminine brain, and that's cool, right? So other aha moments were just like probably with my faith and religion. So traditionally I follow a Christian belief system, and that's a very long story of where I came to that. And so there's nothing in the Bible, there's nothing there that says don't love gay people, don't support LGBTQ. There's even like evidence for supporting trans like people, gender different people. And so like all the damaging stuff that I was hearing, all the things that were like the disconnect, the dissonance that I was getting were from people. They weren't from my faith. They weren't from God. They were from people. And that was a big aha moment. And it's taken a lot of years and me having to distance myself for a while from my faith and from my religion to finally kind of feel at peace. And I don't know, I think I told Lizette this, but about 2 weeks ago, maybe 2 Sundays ago, we had like a pride service at a church here. And I went because it just looked intriguing. And it was the most affirming, beautiful, like I felt at home again. I walked in the door and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm home. I cried through the whole thing. The service started with "We Are Family," like ended with a drag performance. And I was like, this is the most I've ever felt like affirmed, supported. I would feel safe bringing my kids here. This is God.
Do you know how many people's heads would have exploded on the right hearing about this pride service with drag performances? Just, they would have lost their shit. Pardon my French.
So what's really beautiful about Southside Presbyterian, because I too have gone to their pride service and I didn't go this year, is that they are a very old congregation that has been really inclusive, not just to BIPOC people, but Indigenous people. Very early on, like their early congregants were Indigenous people that left the reservation so that their children wouldn't be taken from them. So there's so much history in like social justice work that the church has done over the years. And I was invited by this older lesbian who passed away last year. Her name was Josefina. And she invited Daniel and I to go. And she had started like a workers program there. I mean, I agree with you. Like it's around the corner from our house. And Daniel and I always talk about how wonderful it felt to be in that Adobe space, right? Like, and I loved hearing that you had such an incredible experience. Talk more about that. Like, what has that journey been like for you? And what did it mean to you? Like, TC was there giving a poem, like all these community members were there. What did that feel like for you?
It was amazing. So I had no idea where I was going. And just to preface this, I have not walked in the door of a church, like to go attend a church service in probably 2 years, at least probably 2 or 3. Like I walked away, and in walking in and feeling all of that. And I mean, you could see the love, you could see all these different families that were there representing all these different things. The service itself, like you said, there were songs in Spanish. There was a prayer that was it would be First Nations. It was so inclusive. And I just remember thinking this was the weirdest like marriage. So just to help you understand my faith journey, I converted to Mormonism when I was 18. So I joined the Mormon church. It is probably one of the more extreme, like holy buckets. What you wear, what you talk about, what you eat, everything is so controlled. But I found a home there, and I was there for 20 years. I don't tell people, but I went to BYU. I went on a mission. I was married in the temple, and my parents are not members. So I made that choice knowing they could not attend my wedding. Like that was how deep I was in. And then with everything falling apart in my marriage, when I left that marriage, I didn't fit. I didn't fit who they were. And so I started to see all the cracks that didn't make sense to me. And when you are a part of a church like that, it's everything. It's your entire being. You are so engrossed. It is who you are. It is how you act. It is who you know, everything. And I walked away from that and was alone. I was alone. Like I came to where my family, my parents were, but really I left everything when I left there. And so fast forward about a year later, here I am in an evangelical born again Christian church, and you couldn't be further from, they are so opposite. So there I am there, and kind of being mocked a little bit for some of my previous beliefs, trying to find my footing, trying to raise 2 kids on my own, and trying to find some faith there. And there were good things there. And then my kid is like, this is who I am. And I'm like, oh, we're in the wrong place. We cannot be here. It was absolutely the worst place I could have possibly had my kids. And so again, kind of through like our support group and like people that we knew, like I was directed to a place that was a lot more affirming. And it was a lot more affirming. It was more Methodist. And to go from one extreme, it was so boring. They were so loving. They were kind. They were sweet. They were everything. But I was bored and my kids were bored. And I'm like, well, this isn't it either. So I tried, but we just kind of were starting to figure things out on our own. And so for years, I just didn't think there was a place that was going to fit. And when I walked in 2 weeks ago, it was like the evangelical church and the Methodist church had a baby. And like, this was it. And so that felt like home. We were standing and there was dancing and there was joy and there was inclusion. My heart was bursting. I am crying like a baby, and it just felt like love. And that's what I've been looking for.
Thank you for sharing that, because a lot of our listeners won't know this, but they'll know that I was raised Catholic. But there was a time in COVID where I really grieved the cultural touch point between Catholicism and our Mexican culture, like Chicano culture. It's very like tied together. And I was like, Daniel has missed out on so many milestones that like, it just feels like he will not have that cultural touchstone because we can not participate in the church. And I left the Catholic Church with all the abuse when they lost their lawsuit in 2011. Then Daniel got to be in like 2 quinceañeras and like got to be part of like these like religious touchstones that were being put on by families of trans youth that were like, actually, we're not going to let go of these traditions because they matter to us. And so I think finding that place is so, so important. I wanted to ask you to kind of build off of like the faith and the parenting question and the ways in which we parent only from our own, we can only parent from who we are, right? What do you think, looking back, what are some of the things you would have done differently? Like Jose and I talk about this all the time, like the things we would have done different. What are like 3 of those things?
Watching my younger kiddo go through like the transition journey that they're on. My kids kind of stopped coming to support group like at some some point, like it stopped. And when Eve was younger and going, she wasn't out. She didn't even know that about herself necessarily. And so a lot of the support there, it kind of went over her head. Like she made good friends and things, but like it just kind of wasn't there. I truly, honestly wish I had maintained that, hey, this is just something we do and we go, because I really feel like she needs that real life foundational support, people that are around her that are going through the same journey. She has online friends, she has virtual people that are in that support space, but to have that real life, I can't change that, but that was definitely something that I wish I had done a little bit differently. I also wish that I had gotten her, like myself and my oldest are very pro mental health support, but for whatever reason that piece didn't carry through. I think I wish I'd gotten us all mental health support from the very beginning. Like that would have been good. And we spent a lot of time looking and trying, and there's a lack for juvenile like therapy and mental health support. Like it's not there that needs to be. It's hard for me to say things that I would have done differently because I learned so much through all of my mistakes. Like and I learned and changed, and I'm grateful for that. So I'm not sure that's a really good question, and I'll come up with an answer like 2 hours from now, I'm sure.
You don't need to. You don't need to.
No, that's so perfect. We all were trial by fire.
I know I was. And I know that I have 4 children. My oldest got all of the attention and treatment and learning and I have to do everything perfectly. The second one, got maybe 80% of that. The third one got like 50%. And the last one, he's fending for himself. He is fending for himself. If he lives or not, it's all on him. And so the fact that, we have this learning curve for our children, and then the attention curve, like learning curve and the attention curve, they go in opposite directions. And so our younger children invariably suffer from that. We're not quite as dutiful with them as we are. And ask any parent with multiple children, they will tell you that is an absolute truism. So don't knock yourself up over it. And I like what you said, actually, that because of your mistakes, you've learned so much. I know for a fact that because of my mistakes, I've learned so much. But for my mistakes, I don't know that I would have an appreciation for where I am today, because it is so much further than I would have been without them. So I really appreciate that. And I noticed that faith is such an integral part of your life. I don't know how many people find themselves in situations where their life forces a reckoning with their faith. And it sounds like you really were very intentional about your faith journey. And when your faith journey kind of butted heads with your life journey, you had to make hard choices. What would you say that process was like for other parents who are going through something very similar?
I think first and foremost, the kids come first. The kids come first. They have to. And there's no way on the face of this planet that God would want it any other way. There isn't. Like, God is love and your family is love. And I'm sorry, but whatever my kids needed, that's where I had to be. And that's where I had to follow. And I kind of had a mini like epiphany yesterday, I guess, just in kind of thinking about things. God is never ever going to make me like make a choice. Like I get to choose all along the way. And so when I had to cut ties with churches, I separated myself a lot from just faith. I needed to just dig into whatever life was. He never left me. He's always been there. And like when I'm ready, he's right there ready for me too. And so in talking to parents, I guess I would just say, go with your gut, go with your heart, and your kids come first. And if there is ever a religion that is telling you that you should walk away from your child, you probably should be thinking 3 times over before you even remotely understand, why would a church want that? Why would God want that? Have you heard the story of the prodigal son? Like, no.
I'm going to share, if I shared this story on the podcast before, I'm sorry, but I'm going to share it again. Jose told me about this profound dream that he had about his mother who passed away when Daniel was 2. She was very religious and very spiritual. Like at the end of her life, she was doing like transcendental meditation. She was moving into like this more kind of spiritual space. But she used to call him in Spanish, a pedacito de Dios, which is a piece of God, right? Like, oh, un pedacito de Dios, the saying in Spanish. He said that his mom came to him in this dream dream and he was talking to her and it was like this really lovely dream. And he asked her, am I still your little piece of God? And then she said, no, you're God in a little piece. In Spanish, it would say, eres Dios en un pedazo, right? Like you are God in one piece. And he woke up and he said, oh my God, Lizette, if my mom just gave me the spiritual truth and in one dream, it's that we are connected in all these ways and we come into the world to experience life and form and to teach people. And it makes me think a lot about when Daniel said, I think God made me this way on purpose to be empathy and to teach empathy, right? Like we have the ways in which we're meant to grow spiritually. And so I think that when I met you, it was important for me that you not feel that loss, which is why I was like, I'm going to find people. I mean, I was already connected, but I was like, I'm going to get you in these groups. And I'm glad that you feel safe to share that with us here, because I think so often in self-preservation and protection of our children, we reject all the things that filled our cup and filled our children's cup because we can't find how to incorporate them at their base truth into where we are today, because the noise is so loud and tells us that we can't be a part of that, you know?
Can I say that really quickly?
Yeah.
I think Heather said something that parents really need to listen to and hear clearly.
Mm-hmm.
God would not want you walking away from your children.
No.
And so if your children tomorrow tells you, hey, mom, I don't feel like the gender I was assigned at birth. I feel like this different gender, or I don't feel like any gender, or I love women and I'm a woman. Whatever it is they share with you, nothing should rock your connection to your child enough that they no longer are that which you love and show affection to. Like nothing. Yeah. And it doesn't compute the way people can just turn their backs on their children or kick their children out. And again, we're talking about LGBTQ plus youth who are invariably the ones who find themselves on the street for sharing the most intimate parts of themselves with their families, expecting to be accepted and finding rejection in its stead. And so I really appreciate you sharing your choice for your children and your family such that other parents could learn from your example.
Or even conversion therapy, right? Which is banned in our county. I want to say this too, because Heather highlighted something really important, that finding competent therapists is really difficult. It's the one thing I wish I would have talked to Jack Turbin about too in our earlier interview, because the reason why parents gravitate to support spaces that are parent led is because they can't oftentimes find a competent therapist that will help them. And or most therapists don't take insurance post COVID. They just don't. And you're all of a sudden unable to access some care that you and your family and your child need. And so I think this is kind of where we find ourselves in the desert of like support for LGBTQ youth and for families. And I think it's why they fall victim to conversion therapy or things that are free through religious centers, right? And so it's hard. And you hope that those harms can be mitigated in some way once the families find their way out.
Can we pivot really quickly?
Yeah.
Heather, I know you live in a city and work in a school district that has been really targeted and impacted by the far right. What has that experience been like?
It's actually really difficult. I need my job and I need my kids to be safe. Those are like just pieces of my existence. And so I stand in a space that I can't shout about, but enough people know who I am. They know who my kids are, that a lot of times, I will get someone from another school or another teacher or someone who will be like, hey, do you know this kid? Because I really think they need to know you. Or, hey, I have a trans kid that's about to go to middle school. What do they need to know about the school district that you're in and who are safe people? And so having, I guess, a foot in both sides allows me to be a safer place, but I can't be too loud about how safe I am. It's interesting though, recently, it was a couple years ago, although this happens regularly, the parents will find out that there's someone who's LGBTQ. We'll go with that. And if they're too obvious or too loud about it, people start targeting them. And there was a student teacher that we had in our district who was so beautiful. They were just a non-binary, beautiful self, and they were themselves. And the people at the school supported them. But pictures came to parents that were showing this person not dressing the way they would have been expected to dress. And I'm being very vague on purpose, and I'm super sorry about that. I got literally a piece of mail from these people with pictures of this teacher then, and just screaming at the top of their lungs about how dangerous this person is to our community. And like, this person does not work for my school district. They were a student teacher at the time, and so they were just placed somewhere else, probably for their own safety, honestly. I went to the school board meeting, and another parent went to the school board meeting, and we were like, neither one of us spoke, but later on I found out we were the two people that probably had trans family kids in the district, and we're there to like advocate. But the hate and the vitriol coming out of like the community members there, it was scary, and it was sad, and it was depressing. I did have a school board member reach out to me and just say, I'm so sorry that you had to hear that. Like, they know who I am. But yeah, it's hard. I'm very careful. I'm almost too careful in how I say things in my teaching because I don't want to be accused. So I think I come across a little differently than I actually believe, just for safety's sake, so I can be there. If they saw like my posters or my phone or like anything, then they would know I'm supportive, but I'm almost purposefully, I don't know how to say that. And I'm a little bit ashamed of it, in all honesty, that I can't be more of an advocate. But our state and my district are very careful because of the community that we
I don't think you should be ashamed. I think safety first is like our motto, because you can't do anything if you're fired. You can't do anything if you're dead, and so these times really require us to be strategic more than loud. If you are, one of my favorite books of all times is The Spook Who Sat by the Door. And it's one of my favorite books at all times because this individual knew that he could only really affect change from the inside. And so by being the best, by being the most accurate marksman, by having the highest scores in martial arts, by being so successful when he took his psychological examinations, by doing all the things that made him a perfect agent, he was able to effectively sit inside the halls of power and affect change, bring about the revolution that could only happen when the power structure was toppled and crippled from the inside out. And so I think it's important that when we find ourselves itching to say it or do something and feeling like we're not doing enough, recognize that you're at least that voice of reason, that one person inside who can say things that people will respect and listen to, not because you're this radical flag waving psycho, but because you are very reasoned and sometimes dispassionate to a fault, so that people can hear the logic behind what you're saying. So I think it's important that we don't knock ourselves and beat ourselves up too much. There are times when it's important to be loud and radical and violent and aggressive, and there's times when it's important to be contemplative and quiet, and it's important to have that intuition to know which is which. I'm sorry, Lisa, I know I jumped in on you.
No, what you're saying is really, really important. And like, as someone who is often called when those things happen, like with this teacher, I know who you're talking about, what you're talking about. I will say that you are a comfort to those people in the district. So like, you always have to remember that like you make a difference. Does that make sense? Yeah. But I think what's really important, it goes into our next question, is like where you live, that area is directly impacted in a very distinct way by the far right, by Parents for Purple, by Patriot Arizona, all the things. Like, you're living in the far right. What has that been like, not just at the school level, but also navigating anti-trans legislation, which, because where you live, you don't have non-discrimination protections in the same way Tucson does. Like, you're seeing impacts firsthand. What has that been like for you and your family?
So there's safety concerns sometimes. I would love to have like a political sign out in front of my house. Like, I've told the kids a couple of times, I'm like, I really want one, but I can't do that. I can't put that target on our backs. However, I was really excited because I walked down the street and there's a neighbor that I had zero idea, and they have one up, and I'm like, oh, didn't know you existed. Yay. Because in the last election, it was everywhere was Trump. Everywhere was Trump. And I'm teaching in classes and kids would open up their Chromebooks and here's Trump pictures and they want to do their article on someone famous and it's Trump. And you're like, yay, okay, let's listen to that. I had a situation in one of my classes just the other day and the kids were like, well, I don't know what the question was, but it was some random thing. And I teach young kids. I teach sixth grade. So like they think they're grown up, but they're so not grown up. And they had asked something like, well, I know you're not going to vote for Kamala. You have to be voting for Trump. I'm like, well, I don't talk about elections. We don't talk about anything like that. They're like, well, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just listening to this tirade. And I'm like, you're 11. You really actually care who's president. But obviously they're hearing it from all places and all sides. I think the biggest impact is actually my daughter. And she's in high school. And while she goes to probably one of the more forward thinking high schools in the district, she still has to put up with a lot and she still has to like hear a lot. I know she gets slurs. I know she doesn't share a lot of that. A lot of it's just, she just has to come home and decompress. And there's a lot of hiding. I think we're still hiding because it's safer that way. Truthfully, like there's some security things that I'm going to put into place, even just on my stuff, because I'm worried I'm going to get doxxed or, whatever. It happens. Like, so
I'll send you a resource so that you can
Thank
not
you.
get doxxed. It's a resource Stephen and I both use. On something lighter, you're an educator and you are constantly recommending books to us in group, at book club, to other parents. What are 3 books you would like to recommend to parents to better understand how to support their TGNC kids?
Okay. So I was thinking about this one. I think I want to start with like one of the books that we read for our group that really just helped me super insightful see what it's like to be somebody who is trans. And we've read so many and I could recommend like 50, like read anything by Janet Mock, read like so many. This one was so beautiful. This was so beautiful. So it's How Far the Light Reaches and it's a life in 10 sea creatures. And literally the author writes like these different essays and compares experiences that they're going through with like these deep sea creatures. It's beautiful. It was so moving. And it also like touched on their heritage. And it was just a way to view the things through somebody else's lens, I think. I was trying to find the title of another book, but I'm going to go with like one of these ones. These go together. So this is one recommendation because I still get one more. Okay. And this is for anybody who is religious and trying to reconcile their beliefs with the Bible. Unclobber and Reasonable Doubt. And you will see so clearly that God does not have an agenda against LGBTQ people. People have an agenda against LGBTQ people. So these were awesome. And then because I'm a middle school teacher and we go with like middle grade, that's my channel, that's my thing. And I can't always recommend them to my kids, but I do recommend it on my channel. These books, this one in particular, oh my gosh. This is Obi is Man Enough. They're stories. These are not like real life experiences, although this author is a swimmer. He is trans. This story is powerful. There are some trigger warnings. Please go in knowing, but it was beautiful, beautiful. So
you got to talk about the rest. You can't just do OB. You got to talk about the rest of the books. I'm writing them down. Come on.
You got it. Okay. This is the forerunner. If you look at banned books, this is what started it all for like transgender middle grade youth. It previously was written under the dead name of the kid. So it was previously under, and it does say it right here, George, but they changed it to be Melissa. This author has gone on to write multiple books. So I did a whole thing on non-binary kids and like reading books that highlighted non-binary, which meet Rick. So same author and just getting to know from a different perspective. So Alex Gino is fantastic. And then this one came out about the same time as Melissa. It's Gracefully Grayson. Same kind of story. It's interesting that a lot of these LGBTQ kiddos, and especially the trans kiddos, gravitate toward theater, gravitate toward drama, and toward stories that allow them to be someone else. And that's how they kind of start to share their identity. And so that's another one. This one has been on my to be read. I have not read this one, but I love the cover. And I've had so many kids that have read it and they really like it. So The Art of Being Normal. I could go on and on and on and
Thank
on.
you. I think we're going to do a special episode on LGBTQ books pages with Heather because it's so important. In my men's group, I've been sharing resources. And one of the things that I think is important for people to do is to understand the experiences of gender expansive people. And the best way to do that, if you don't know them, is to read the works about them, by them, and to watch stories about them and by them to get a perspective. And I say about them and by them because it's important also that we are reading the works of authors that identify in the community and not cis people writing about gender expansive people.
Melissa meant a lot to Daniel. He read that very early on.
Really?
And that was a very important book to him. I think some of the other YA books, he was like, oh, I want more. I want more. But yeah, Melissa was really important in our home.
All right. So I'm going to take this last question that Lizette is supposed to ask you because we are almost at time and I want to make sure that we get this question in there. You have a lived experience that has been informed by raising your two kiddos, and you've learned a lot on the way. What are 3 pieces of advice that you would give parents listening to this podcast on how to support their gender expansive children?
I think top, number 1, this is their life. This is their journey. So the way I phrase it to my kids always is, honey, you're driving the bus. I'm a passenger. I'm going to point out some stops along the way that might be helpful. Hey, we could stop here. Hey, this might be something you would look at, but you're driving the bus. So you say how fast, you say where we stop, you say when, you say we change directions, you say we turn right. Like all of it, they're driving the bus. So you're along for the ride and it's a privilege to be there. And just remember that they felt you were safe enough, that they included you on that journey. Let them lead. Love them exactly where they are, who they are, and just be willing, I think, to listen more than you talk. Listen.
I love you, Heather. Thank you for being on the episode today.
This was fun. Thank you.
Now it's time for our recurring segment, Allies and Assholes, where we highlight individuals or groups who are supporting the LGBTQI community on the one hand and call out straight up assholes who are trying to move us all backwards on the other. Lisette, who are we talking about today?
Our ally of the week is Selena Gomez. During a red carpet interview for her new film, Emilia Perez, Gomez was overwhelmed with emotion as she spoke about her deep compassion for the trans community. Gomez said, "You are so seen, so loved, and I have such a deep compassion." Pausing for a moment to collect herself. This outspoken support during this political climate by celebrities like Selena are extremely important.
I just love when people like Selena Gomez use their platform for good. It is rare that people with the type of access and privilege that folks like Selena Gomez and Will Ferrell have actually use their platforms to prop up, uplift, support the LGBTQ plus community. And to have someone so young recognizing the power of her platform and using it for this purpose, I think is tremendous.
And this is why Selena Gomez is our ally of the week.
Okay, congratulations to Selena Gomez. Now on to our asshole of the week. Our asshole of the week is Micah Beckwith. Micah Beckwith was speaking at the Monroe County Republican Party's October 1st dinner meeting when he announced plans to fire state employees who use pronouns in their email signatures, framing the practice as a marker of far-left ideology. LGBTQ plus advocates warn that the GOP lieutenant governor's statement harms state government employees who are essential across sectors, including education, healthcare, social services, and law enforcement. By threatening to fire employees over something as simple as using pronouns, they argue Beckwith's policy would destabilize the workforce, compromise vital public services, and discourage private businesses that value diversity and inclusion from investing in the state.
Stephen, I think we have seen this across the board, this attack on allies, right? For example, we saw what happened in Texas where people are automatically mandated reporters. We see this anywhere where like just friends, allies, neighbors can show up and support, they want to oppress and stop that from happening. And so it's really, really unfortunate that Micah Beckwith was able to do this.
So I think that we are in a time where violence is the order of the day for a particular segment of our population. And it's because they lack the capacity to be intellectual, to reason, to demonstrate compassion and empathy for other people. And this mad desire for power and control of other people and other people's bodies in particular manifests in policies such as this. And this is why Micah Beckwith is our asshole of the week. Well, that's our show for today, folks. I want to thank today's guest, Heather Postelwait, for joining us today. And of course, I got to give it up to my co-host, Lizette for bringing the work to us and for being the amazing person that she is.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. I couldn't do this without you. And obviously, we couldn't do this without all of you, our listeners. So thanks for tuning in to the Parent Advocate Podcast.
And folks, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and do whatever you've got to do to stay up to date with everything going on here at the Parent Advocate Podcast. Goodbye.
Goodbye.